Good day, and thank you for joining CivilNet. Today there was a protest action in front of one of the media centers in Armenia, and on the occasion and the reason why this action today and some of the problems generally domestic violence and women in Armenia are facing. On these subjects we'll be speaking with Anahit Simonyan from the Women's Resource Center. She's a women's rights defender. Thank you for being here today, Anahit. So please tell us a little more why this action today and what's the story behind it.
Thank you, Robina, for having me here, first of all. The action was in relation to one of the TV shows on Armenia TV, or ATV in particular, which is the half-open windows. The thing is that several months ago, one of the heroes was husband, actually a batterer who was continuously subjecting his wife to different forms of domestic violence and abuse. And on the 8th of July, he axed his ex-wife, mother-in-law, and father-in-law. Mother-in-law unfortunately was killed. And during the show where he was present, actually, for some 50 minutes, I guess, he was very much praised for this kind of behavior towards women, towards his wife, and wife was also very much judged, very much criticized in very harsh wording, a classic scenario of victim blaming. So what we had actually, we had a total justification of violence, of male domination in relationship and female subordination. So I think the problem was also the presence of a psychologist who was constantly making a very subjective judgments about the whole situation without having another side of the issue, the woman in the story.
I was going to ask you, was there someone from the wife's side who presented her argument?
No one.
But why was this? Did they refuse to participate? Were they not invited?
They weren't even notified about it, so they had no information. They saw the show only after it was on air. So it was only the husband with his mother. So it was very one-sided approach to the issue, and hard for them from that. The judgments were really also subjective, one-sided. There was a lot of victim blaming towards the wife. There was a lot of appraisal of the conduct of the husband. Actually really packed him on the back for how he was behaving and treating his wife.
So what are the details of this? Because what I know is that on July 8th, he attacked his wife's family, wanting to see his son. The wife and her father were hospitalized. Her mother passed away. He killed her. But before that, there was a court case against him, and he was supposed to be detained for 2 months.
He was supposed to be imprisoned for the term of 6 months, but the term was not applied conditionally, which is actually very ridiculous, because the judge should have taken into account the whole circumstances of the case, to take into account the fact that the wife was actually constantly under the threat. Her health and her life was under the threat, and the threat was inflicted by the husband. So this is one part of the story. So, you know, it was really like accumulation of a lot of factors. So it was the court system which actually failed. It was the media which actually propagated and justified husband's conduct and the way he treated his wife. And then on the night, on the very day of the murder and of the incident, the thing was that they both called the police after the argument, and the police came and took to the police station only the wife and her mother, leaving abusive husband there without any knowledge where it's going to go, what he was going to do. He waited there for 3 hours, went, got an axe, came back. He was waiting them in front of the house, and as soon as they came back, they went out of the police car, approached the house, and then this is where he axed them. So it's a lot also about negligence of the police. So it didn't really take
So
care
it's
about.
at least three systems.
It's the whole
that are
system.
failing.
It's the whole system of protection of women against violence.
So as someone who's been following it from the media, like the rest of Armenia, from what I understand, the narrative was that he demanded to see his son, and he was not allowed.
The narrative was that, and that's the narrative which actually was introduced very much through these show, through this half-open windows. He had hours determined by the court during which he could see, and there was the issue that at some point he didn't show up. He actually, because they were divorced, he had an obligation of showing a financial support to them, which he never did. So that's the thing, you know, the show created all this image of very caring husband and father who was suffering because he was never allowed to see the child. So all this situation was never approached from the point of the woman, of the wife, why she sustained abuse and violence for so long, what forced her to divorce, and why she couldn't be protected from the society, from all this kind of abuse and suffering she sustained throughout her relationship. So all this side of the story was never raised, no one was interested in it, and the whole show was constructed around him, his image of a real man, and her image of not a proper woman.
So if we zoom out from this story, because unfortunately this is not a singular case in Armenia. If we zoom out, so what's the media relation to domestic violence, and what's the society's reaction to domestic violence? Because you're the Women's Resource Center, this is what you do. It all comes down to you at the end of the day, since the whole other structures are failing.
Yeah, totally right. It's a very complex issue, and the issue of domestic violence, to me, is a social disease, because you can't say that your society is healthy when 52% of your population is actually potentially or in fact being in the danger of abuse and violence throughout their lives. So this is the real situation. So we have the narrative around the problem, which is how the society reacts and how the society sees. And we have the legal framework. This is how the law of your state treats the issue. And we have problems within these both domains. And our organization is trying to make up all those problems in both sectors, and narrative change is one of the things we really try to do. But we should also realize that it's primarily the state's responsibility. As far as the state has a responsibility to create a proper legal framework within which women will be protected from violence and abuse, which is their basic human rights. Another thing is the state's responsibility to challenge and to change and to eradicate all the stereotypes, all the prejudices which hamper the full realization of women's rights and their right to be free from violence. So, and the media and the role of the media is a tool, and is a very powerful tool apart from everything in the scope of the narrative change. And for the state, this tool could have been very proactively used for this narrative change, very proactively used for the propagation of not abnormal and violent relationships, subordinate relationships, but relationships based on based on equal rights and opportunities. So that's, yeah.
To put aside a talk show that was one-sided, there's also this whole production of soap operas that's going on. And as we were talking before, women are usually weak and victimized. Yeah. Or they're
always someone who either needs the support from men, like resting on men's mercy and support.
But at the end of the day, this is also the scriptwriters or the television's decision to produce such a soap opera. Is it because the demand is also
Yeah, sure, it
I
is.
mean, would anyone watch a soap opera
It's like
with
a
a
vicious
strong female character?
It's like a vicious circle, you know. So at some point, you need to realize the problem. You need to realize the role of the media, a very powerful role in the creation of mass opinion and attitudes, and break the cycle. Of course, we have deeply rooted gender stereotypes in our society. We have those gender roles, gender socialization, which leads to then perception of who man is, woman is, how they should, in what kind of relationship they should, what you can't as a man and woman. So we have this in the society, and then we have media, which reproduces all those patterns of behavior, and then especially when it comes to the younger generation, they again see this pattern of behavior, they see it as normal. For them, it becomes normalized pattern. Violence becomes normalized. Violence towards women becomes normalized. They grow up, and in their interpersonal relations, they tend to express the same attitudes, and they feel justified. They feel rightful to do that. So it is really a vicious circle. This is why I'm talking about a state's obligation to intervene and to change this narrative.
So the state so far has rejected and not discussed two versions of domestic violence law, which have been proposed, I think, if not three. One is in the making, and from my conversations, I know that a lot of activists and other women's rights organizations are hopeful that it will soon pass. So if the law is not in place, how do you suppose such a stereotype breaking kind of intervention from the government would actually happen?
Yeah, absolutely. There is a huge lack of political will to address this issue for many years now. The law has been circulated since 2009, and it's a lot. You can't just fight for a very basic legal framework for protection of your life and health for like almost 10 years, right, more or less. But on the other hand, I just want to stress out, because there is we see the state as an entity responsible for the adoption of the laws, but we very often fail, or we don't fail, but in the society, there is not that much of a realization that for the narrative change, for the change of the stereotypes and the attitudes, which in this or that way hamper the realization of my right as a woman, as a man, or whoever, this is also a state's responsibility. This is not resting within NGOs, this is not resting within an individual. A lot of people doing a lot of things for that. But this is a primary demand from the state also. And this is why we try constantly as a civil society activist to show our discontent with the current situation, to raise those issues, to bring them to the attention of both the public and of the governmental bodies, to say to them that this is not okay. We can't keep on living within the state where you have soap operas, where violence against women is being portrayed as a part of men's masculinity. So if you are a proper man, you should be violent towards women. So
or at least controlling.
At least controlling. Controlling behavior and coercive control is a form of domestic violence. Is totally widespread. It's almost normalized. It's the pattern of behavior in our country. So imagine how hard it is to break it after it.
Another question is that usually when women appeal to you, what stage do they appeal? Is it at the very last stage of desperation where we've been already victimized, or there are women who come forward and say, you know, my husband is too controlling, and before it gets too far, I would like to do something, or this is too much to ask for?
It depends, of course. Unfortunately, I wouldn't say that the realization that controlling behavior is the stage in abusive relation, which can then result in physical or sexual abuse, is that much widespread, this kind of understanding. And I wouldn't say it because in the scope of patriarchal society, girls from the very young age are being taught to be obedient, are being taught to be calm, well-tempered, whereas boys are being taught to be controlling, aggressive, very, demanding. So we grow up in this kind of a pattern. So controlling behavior is very often being seen within some framework as somehow normal, as somehow okay, and everyone thinks like, yeah, but it shouldn't really, maybe it won't really go too far and come to other kinds of abuse, psychological abuse, physical abuse, and this sort of things. And because also there is very low level of awareness raising of the cycles of domestic violence, of the root causes of domestic violence, which is also a state's responsibility, by the way. So back to your question, mostly they take up the phone and call to the hotline in many cases when it's when they face cases of physical abuse, severe forms of psychological abuse. We avail them with both psychosocial and legal support, legal counseling, so they will be aware of all the options they have, and also of all the challenges in the state system they will face. And the happy thing for me to realize is that through many years of really hard work, I think we have reached a point that despite all these challenges, many women still decide to go further, to take it to the court, to seek justice, to seek solution, and this is very important.
Knowing very well what an
Knowing
ordeal
that
will
you
be
can
there.
end up, your ex-husband can end up with $150 of fine for years of abuse towards you.
Which we've
Which we had just very recently. So
okay, so one last question. As means of breaking the stereotype or this common narrative of the dominance of men or the female, subordination, what's the practical step? Let's say the state somehow tries to, keep the soap operas that are too aggressive in this out of the screens. Is this something, or social advertising? What are the steps, or probably maybe some other action that the state should or could take? What's your suggestion?
Well, definitely it's the state's obligation under international human rights law, and particularly under the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women, to break the stereotypes and prejudices which hampers the full realization of women's rights. And one of the ways is to aware public about the existence of those stereotypes and about their consequences on the individual implementation and realization and protection of rights. So awareness raising is one thing, and state has a lot of tools to do that. And when it comes particularly to media, you mentioned it very fairly, it's social advertising, which can be really easily used, and other forms of other tools which media avails to create an alternative within all this pile of violence, support, and women's marginalization, women's suppression, to show that this is not the right pattern, this is harmful, and this is healthy. This is rightful. So this is one thing. Another thing, gender sensitization of the media. Media workers should be aware of the human rights issues in the country from gender perspective. They should know how you should talk about some kind of, sometimes of very sensitive issues like violence, like sexual violence, like abuse, which kind of wording you can use, which kind of wording you can't use. And this kind of training and awareness raising within the professionals is also state's responsibility, and especially when it comes to state-run media. Another thing, of course, is the state policy, which will clearly indicate that propagation of violence, hate speech, incitement to violence against women is something which should be eradicated, and taking practical policy steps towards that. Because hate speech is also huge, and because you as a state know the context of your country, you know that this particular issue is real and is going on for years. So you should take all kind of positive steps. You are obliged to change the narrative. A, to change the narrative, and B, to give every woman as a citizen of this country real working legal tools to address injustice they face during different stages of their lives. So mechanisms for victim support, victim rehabilitation, rehabilitation for the batterers and the perpetrators, which is also very important, and the punishment, which is the most important thing when we come to the legal framework, because very often they say, what is the difference between treating domestic violence just as a crime under the penal code, like a general penal code, and having a separate law on the prevention and punishment of the domestic violence? It is because you see this crime as a separate issue. You see the root causes lying in gender roles, lying in the socialization, gender socialization. You see it from the victim's perspective, because for a victim it is not that easy very often to go forward, and the burden of proof is very often lies within the victim. So there are a lot of challenges which you face within the ordinary system, legal, like penal code. So you should have all the mechanism which will be victim oriented and victim focused. And this is the proper mechanism you as a state should avail for your citizens.
Okay, thank you very much and best of luck with all the work you're doing. And we also thank the viewers for joining us. Stay with CivilNet.